So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Marshane. I'm part of the team here at Oxford College of Management. I'd just like to let you all know that this is being recorded so we can send out this and some slides afterwards. But today we have a very interesting webinar hosted by Nina on HR's critical role in the cybersecurity landscape. Nina is a CIPD tutor here at our college. She has over 17 years of experience within leadership and management, so I think she's very qualified for today's talk. We'll have the presentation with Nina first, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. There is a Q&A function, or you could post your comments in the chat. It's up to you. But Nina, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Happy Wednesday. And yes, as Marshane said, we'll be talking about HR's role in cybersecurity landscape, which is an exciting topic because I think in general, we know the importance of it, but still it feels relatively new, even though it really isn't. So today's conversation will be grounded in a lot of data from the UK government, but there will be some examples also from the world. And of course, no country in the world now is immune to cybersecurity. So it's two challenges with cybersecurity. So it's a topic that's relevant to everyone. I'm not really going to introduce myself any further because you've done a beautiful job, Marshane, but I have been in the HR and leadership landscape for some time now, and I've actually worked quite closely with teams that work on cybersecurity and the challenges that also they come across even internally, let alone externally, trying to get people to actually see the importance of them and the risks, because sometimes the importance is known, but the risk isn't necessarily perceived as a risk that applies to us. So before we kick off, I wanted to ask if you can pop in the chat box. So I have a question for you: is how many cyber attacks do you think were attempted in 2023 on businesses in the UK? If you can pop in the chat box, that would be amazing, so I can see it. So how many cyber attacks were attempted on UK businesses in 2023? 500,000 from Ellie. Good guess. Thank you. Any other guesses? Over 6 million from Sandeep. Excellent guess. Any other guesses? These are good. These are good. There's a slight disparity between the numbers, but these are both good shots. And thank you for sharing it. So, in terms of the UK landscape, 7.78 million cyber crimes against the UK businesses were there were almost 8 million breaches last year. And in case of in terms of a daily rate, if you wanted to imagine it, so that's over 21,000 attacks every day. And that 21,000 is pretty much how many people it takes to fill up the O2 Arena in London. So it's obviously massive, and over 116,000 of it was actually non-phishing cyber crimes. So some of them are obviously being perceived as, oh, these are low risk, but actually majority of them are not low risk. And Ellie's shocked, yeah. So almost 8 million. And if you think about it, like obviously I compared it to the O2 Arena, but London has almost 9 million people there and like 8 million cyber crimes and attacks last year. That's pretty much everyone in London being hit, which is crazy. And if you take it on a global scale, it's obviously even bigger. But this just goes to show how important cybersecurity is. So now we know that almost 8 million cyber crimes against UK businesses were committed last year. How many businesses in the UK do you think there are in total? So if we think 8 million cyber attacks, how many businesses are there in the UK? I'm talking about the private sector. Any guesses? Sandeep says 10 million. Marlon says 5 million. Any other? Ellie says 15 million. So we've got 5, 10, 15. Amy says 6 million. Marshane says 3 million. So it's 5.6. So 5.6 million businesses in the private sector in the UK and nearly 8 million crimes. So I think like this, the statistical chance of a private business being hit is like 113%, which is crazy. But very often we think that this isn't going to happen, or we don't necessarily think about it every day. So what is the biggest cyber threat, do we think, in our businesses? So nearly 8 million attacks, 5.6 million businesses. What do we think is the biggest cyber threat? Not just in the UK, globally. But you can make it UK relevant. Phishing, yeah. Thank you, Sandeep. So phishing is massive. Any other ideas? What do you think would be, if you were to think about your own business, what do you think would be the biggest business? Full password policies. Thank you, Amy. Yeah. Hacking. Yeah. Data. Yeah. Excellent answers, everyone. Well, actually, the biggest risk, I kind of almost gave away the answer, is our perception that it won't happen to us. And this isn't just my thinking, or I said so, but from the UK government survey, a lot of the data that has come out is actually that people think, or businesses think, that it's not going to happen to us. Very often the perception is that cyber crimes happen to tech businesses, where people that obviously have got a lot of, naturally are linked to a lot of data available. And it's like with a lot of things in life and in business, is that it's gonna, if we know it's happening, but it's not going to happen to us, that we're too small and so on. But there is no data to say that this size of the business is more at risk than others. Basically, a lot of small, medium businesses get as much hit as large businesses across all industries. And I'll give some examples in a minute, but basically no one, as we have seen from the fact that there's less than 6 million businesses and over 8 million crimes, no one is immune to it. But according to the data and surveys amongst businesses, a lot of the times leadership is not taking it seriously enough. And obviously people are busy, we don't have time. So it's kind of easy to think, oh, this is not, like, it's important, but it's never going to happen to us, so on the back burner. But as we now know, 130% chance that it's going to happen to us. So it's very, very important for us to pay attention to this and be prepared. So I just keep asking you questions, because otherwise it's just a talking head at you, which is not as fun. So now what I'd like you to do is also pop it in the chat box of where do you think are the risk points for your business of data being stolen or cybercrime happening. So if you think about your business or the employee journey, where are the points where you think things actually could be at risk? If you can pop in the chat box again, because I don't think you can unmute yourselves. If you can and you want to chat, then that would be great. But if not, pop in the chat box and that would be amazing. But where do you think, if you think about your business and your product journey and employee journey, your customer journey, where are the biggest risks where you can see cyber criminals actually having malicious emails? Absolutely. Especially now, if we think about so many people also working remotely and they'll like access on all sorts of devices everywhere. Humans are the biggest risk. That is an excellent point. Yes, thank you, Ellie. This is I really love this point, because a lot of the times is people think, oh, it's obviously tech, right? It's technology, it's AI, it's this and that. But actually it's people behind all of those tools that are the biggest risk. And also we'll talk about a little bit later about kind of inside the business risks. Any other ideas from anyone? So where do you think would be the risks for your business? Or maybe you know of some cases that have happened or have experienced something that you know that there's a point where risk is higher. . Personal data. Thank you, Merlin. Absolutely. This is so important because recently, a well-known British brand actually had been a victim of a cyber attack. It wasn't just a threat, it was an actual attack, and employees' data, it wasn't customers' data, it was employees' data that got stolen. And it was current employees and ex-employees, and basically everything that you need to steal someone's identity got stolen. And this is massive. This is massive risks for organizations, especially because sometimes the focus is very much on customer data, but there is less focus on our internal data, because obviously the cases that we see in the news or the cases that are kind of publicized very often are linked to customer data, because very often they also lead to very serious consequences. Whereas sometimes when employee data is being stolen, that's not necessarily being publicized so much, but it also happens all the time and it's massively risky. Any other thoughts from anyone? We will go back. We will go back to this point towards the end of the session. But if you think about all the different practices that we have, so from recruitment and product sales, where do you think are the points where maybe data could be at risk, and maybe where we are not paying enough attention to what is happening with our data internally and externally? If you think about the journey from actually attraction to exit, and hopefully positive advocacy for the business. Personal devices, laptops, 100%, Merlin, thank you. LinkedIn, absolutely, you can find out so much about people and where they work, 100%. I love this meme. I don't know if you guys have seen it, probably, where people think that, the data that is being stolen sometimes, and like cyber criminals, is just someone sitting in a dark room and trying to find information. But there's so much information that we put out willingly online that it's very easy for people to actually use and then use it against us in businesses, because we share so much online on social media. Any other thoughts from anyone? Okay, well, if you think of anything else, feel free to pop things in the chat box throughout the session. So just going to give you some statistics. I know in HR we do like statistics, and we have plenty of data to deal with as well. So this is important for us to talk about. So 72% of UK organizations faced a ransomware attack last year, which was, so 2023, which was a 15% increase on 2022. And obviously this is only going to get bigger, because actually criminals are very often getting what they want, because organizations don't feel prepared. So if you don't feel prepared, if you don't actually know how to respond to this, then unfortunately, very often organizations have to deal with it by trying to work with the criminals and pay. So then that obviously means that the criminals are successful. And then it happens more often. So for anyone who's maybe not 100% familiar with the terminology, ransomware is basically just a malicious software that is designed to block access to computer systems until you pay money. So you might have heard this happen in NHS, I think a couple of years ago. But basically what happens is you open your laptop or you come into work and you get just a notice on your screen that you need to pay X amount of money. It will normally be done via Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Obviously, you can't find out where the person is, and you can't access any of your devices or your systems until a sum of money is being paid. Obviously, this brings disruption to operations, massive financial losses, and also damage to reputation. And it's very hard to find out actually where the criminals come from and so on. So like once it happens, it's very difficult to deal with. That's why obviously prevention, as we know in HR, don't need to talk to us like we're completely unaware. We know prevention is key, and having robust processes for that not to happen in the first place, because once it happens, it can take months. So one of the organizations I'm familiar with, also when things have happened and there was a cyber attack, it took over 6 months to be able to recover all the systems and get the company back to where it was in terms of operations, because that's how much damage is done. Aside of the data being stolen and the financial losses, just the fact that all the processes and operations were impacted for such a long time, that in itself cost the company massive amounts of money. So it's not just the obvious thing. So in 2019, so some examples I wanted to share. This is from 2019, so a few years ago, but Sony Pictures had data stolen as well. And it wasn't just of customers, it was of employees as well. And again, over 100 million people were impacted in this. So if we think about the risks, when we think about our businesses, sometimes when I start, I said the biggest threat is our perception that it won't happen to us. Because when we hear of cases like this, where hundreds of millions of people are involved, and where obviously organization is global and is huge, and so on. So it feels maybe not relatable always. But as we know, it can happen to anyone. And in this case, obviously, massive amounts of data got stolen. And again, everything that would help people to steal someone's identity, people's bank details, people's dates of birth, people's names, addresses, everything. And that's for customers and employees. So obviously a massive, massive case. In the UK, you might have heard as well, last year in January, a ransomware attacks targeted quite a few schools in the UK over Christmas. And they were demanding £15 million. So this obviously disrupted the new year at school. Teachers couldn't access computers and so on. So again, this, you would think naturally with the perception is a lot of the times that this maybe applies more to tech companies or big companies and so on. But the education sector wouldn't naturally maybe come to mind as, okay, criminals are going to target education over Christmas, but they did. And the charity sector is also not immune. So Save the Children also had a cyber attack, also back in January 2023. Retailers like JD Sports, and again, you will get shared the slides, and in the notes you'll see links to all of the cases that I'm sharing here. But basically, there is no trends and there is no immunity in any way, shape, or form, because criminals will go as low as even attacking charitable organizations and demanding money from them. And as I mentioned, because often people don't know how to deal with this, they actually pay the sum of money. Of course, if the sum of money is ridiculous and the organization isn't actually able to pay, then there are other consequences also and other threats. But ultimately, once you come into work and things have already happened, it's very difficult for people to be able to come out of it, whether that's trying to work with the criminals or working with the police and so on. These are not things that can happen and can be fixed overnight. So no one is immune, unfortunately. Another case I wanted to share is Capital One. So this is from 2000, actually, no, the Sony one was from 2014. Sorry, the Sony one was a little bit older. But if you think about it, in 10 years, how we live in the world of the digital space is now so much bigger than it's been 10 years ago. So the risks are even higher. But Capital One is from 2019. And this one you also might have heard of because it was massive, where an ex-employee of Amazon Web had stolen data of over 100 million people, customers and employees. And I think there is a case going on still for it now, because obviously people's data has been impacted, is coming up to about $190 million in payouts for the damages. So again, this was someone who was savvy because they were trained in this and had easier access to data that they shouldn't have had access to. So it's not just about thinking where can people obviously access us from the outside, but also this person inside the knowledge and had knowledge of where the weaker points of the system are, because that's where you obviously tackle where you know where the weaknesses are. So again, a massive case here. So how prepared are we in terms of how do we feel in HR? So again, from the UK government's survey from last year, in the UK especially, we feel that we're not very prepared in HR. So overall, HR individuals feel confident with having the right knowledge and having awareness, but not having actually not having enough training in how to deal with things or how to prepare. So people have awareness of obviously the risks. But again, feeling like we're not prepared, we don't have money, we don't have the time for it, like we're busy with a million other things. And also, of course, a big challenge is leadership and taking and getting leadership on board with the seriousness of this. And again, I just want to mention that this isn't just the responsibility of HR professionals, because we are at the heart of businesses, and a lot of the times we feel that we have responsibility for everything and we are at every part of the journey. And yes, we handle a lot of data and we have obviously insights into a lot of data. But ultimately, without the buy-in from leadership and support from leadership, it's also very difficult for HR to be effective, because leadership also needs to be aware of this, needs to take it seriously, and needs to invest the time and money in education, in the right systems, and so on. HR on our own, we're not able to do everything. Sometimes, though, I think the perception is that, oh, cybersecurity is something that is IT's job. And yes, IT obviously specializes in this area. And we're probably, a lot of firms now have cybersecurity roles and so on, which is helpful. But equally, we need to work with them in partnership, because we handle a lot of data and we use a lot of systems. We also use a lot of spreadsheets still. So I recently read that we still, a lot of employees' data, in especially smaller businesses, still exist on Excel spreadsheets that are not even password protected. So these are things that obviously are posing risks to us, but it's important for us to be aware of what is the risks amongst all of the data that we're handling, as well as the overall risk to the business and the support from our leadership teams. So around 70% of HR professionals reported in the UK that they felt that they were not adequately equipped to handle cybersecurity issues and prevent data breaches within their organizations. So again, we like to know, so we're always very on top of what's happening in businesses and in the landscape of risks in all sorts of areas, but we don't always have the time and support and the money to be able to actually prevent things and put things in place properly. So that's what we're talking about this today. Because hopefully the statistics that I think were quite big at the start are going to help you to prepare strong arguments for the seriousness of this, because it's not going to get any smaller or any less risky. It's only going to get bigger. So going back to what we started with kind of at the start, we're thinking about the points of risks. Recruitment, starting with recruitment. So after we'll go through the whole employee journey. So online job postings and application portals, like a lot of the times we don't have control over this because we use external platforms. Now, we don't actually know what cybersecurity measures they have got in place. And of course, the assumption is that they have very good cybersecurity because very often they're big. This isn't always the case. And sometimes also when we use smaller platforms or even our own websites, like we need to be aware of like what is the risks there, because people will be submitting their CVs, they will be submitting personal information. Sometimes we obviously do background checks, references, data exchange, and so on. And there is a lot of communications via email. So all of this can pose a risk. And obviously at the start, I think, Madeline, you said emails are a massive risk. And this is like very often the first point where we are communicating with someone who may not even become an employee to the business, right? Because they're candidates or we're going through the attraction process and so on. Yet the risks are already there because we're already communicating with people, or we're already using certain platforms, whether that's our own or external platforms, to be able to gather people's data. So of course, if we're using external organizations, then the responsibility is not just on us, but it is our responsibility to check and make sure that people that we use and the platforms that we use actually have good security measures and have some mitigating circumstances and mitigating plans, so they actually know what to do. Because like if things happen and we're involved, no one is going to think, oh, it was this person or that person. It's like, oh, actually, I was involved because I applied to this organization. So it's difficult to then not be partly responsible if we haven't checked what security measures are on the different platforms. So onboarding, again, whilst we're onboarding, we're collecting even more data, personal data from people. We are obviously accessing systems and setting people up on different systems and implementing the data into the systems. So that poses risks as well. And then we, of course, are giving people, companies, hardware and software, which is a risk in itself. We need to make sure that like the devices that we have got have the right protections, because people will be now is no longer the days where the computer is just at the desk within their organizational office. Like people take devices with them. They use their devices for their work reasons, sometimes for personal reasons. You don't know what apps they're downloading and so on. So if we don't have really robust processes and policies for what is allowed and what isn't allowed on works devices, also what people put on their personal devices from the organization, then there's a lot of risk in that in itself right from the get-go, as well as if we have any health benefits programs and so on, and any like perks that obviously are very popular now, where we're enrolling people into other platforms, then that poses risk. That's a point of risk as well. And then, of course, that leads to data management and how we manage data. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of organizations that still maybe store data. Some maybe store on spreadsheets, as I use as an example. But the big thing is that in a lot of organizations, data is stored in a very fractioned way. So there isn't one place to store it, which again, there are pros and cons, because if you have one place to store it and that gets attacked, then obviously all the data is gone. On the other hand, if it's all over the place, then there's more points of risk. So it's weighing up the options, but also ensuring that whatever the solution for the organization, that we have got actually risk assessments done at every point, because every organization might need something different, but it's important that we are aware of where are the risks. And of course, then we need to be mindful of access controls to sensitive HR databases. And this is also important because some of the data that was leaked, so some of the examples that I have given from Sony or Capital One and so on, even things like salary details were stolen and leaked. So again, where do people get that from? Like that's a risk from internal system for sure. Regular data transfer between departments and external agencies. So again, whoever we work with, and we don't always think about it, even working with recruitment agencies, that is also a risk in itself, especially if we think about advertising online on the bigger platforms. Maybe we feel like we have more confidence in the bigger platforms having more security. As I mentioned, this also isn't always the case, so it's worth checking. But when we work with agencies, it's even more important for us to know what do they do, because very often small providers also have that perception of kind of bigger threat of it's not going to happen to us or it doesn't apply to us and so on, and actually don't have that many security measures in place. So potentially they could be bringing risks to your organization and your data as well. And then the obvious one, cloud storage and third-party data processors as well. So we have got, I've just discussed 3, there's 6 more to go. And a lot more, these are obviously just basics, but I also wanted to let you know that you don't have to worry about remembering this or making notes. And I probably should have said the other stuff, but I will share this all with you and some freebies that we prepare to make sure that you have got it all. The other point is employee management, so regular updates to employee records like performance evaluation, feedback systems and so on, and the grievances, disciplinary records. Like, of course, they have also got people's details. And yet again, very often the perception is that maybe things like payroll is that we need to worry about in our payroll system because that's where data is. And that is true, but we kind of miss the other points that maybe feel less important or less risky. Yet, of course, if we think about internal risks as well as external risks, people will be looking for the weakest points. Criminals won't be looking for, where is it really robust? Where do we know organizations pay most attention? They'll be looking for where are they not paying attention, because it's the easiest point of entry. So it's important for us to think about the whole journey and not just the most obvious points. But of course, payroll and benefits administration is massive because we'll have systems. There's obviously access to people's IDs, people's bank accounts, and all sorts of information that is very risky for us if it's not protected. Again, healthcare insurance, pension plans, that sort of thing, there's access there. And very often third-party service providers are also handling confidential employee data. So here again, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of checking who you're working with when it comes to third-party interactions. And this isn't going just for the platforms that you work with, or maybe recruitment agencies, or even like employee assistance programs, and that sort of support, but even consultants. Again, very often smaller scale or smaller organizations, so maybe it doesn't feel so risky, or maybe we don't check. But it's important for us to have robust processes in place to be able to identify like what processes and protections do people have in place before they start working with us. Because even if you have the most robust processes, incredible protection, if you work with people who don't, your data are still at risk. So it's also important to make sure that all sides are covered. Otherwise, you might put in a lot of work and a lot of effort in something that's still bringing a lot of risks. And of course, on third party, sometimes payroll is outsourced for some organizations. So that's also important to know what are the protection mechanisms in place for the organizations that we use. I feel like I'm just talking at you, but we are in a webinar, so that's what I'm meant to do. But I really want some interaction, so I will get in the chat box and share some stuff in a minute again. But the other things on the employee journey and obviously points of risk within HR is remote access to HR systems by employees or third parties. Also the security of mobile devices and laptops in HR operations as well. And how we operate within the team and outside of the team, and who has got access to it, because it's not very often, it's not just HR people that have got access to the data. Very often managers will have access to data as well. And sometimes, again, there are varying levels of treating data with the right levels of seriousness by different areas that may have access to the data. And sometimes we don't even know who has access to the data, which is also very risky. So it's important for us to know like where are the points of risk, but also who is accessing the data and where is it available. So then compliance and legal, of course, we have to comply with data protection laws. We have to also make sure that we have got consent forms and privacy notices. And this is important for our GDPR compliance. But again, sometimes how this data is being stored is we're protecting ourselves from one aspect, so we're making sure that we're protecting from GDPR perspective, but then the data isn't protected in terms of actually potential cyber attacks and criminals. So again, it's important that we look at every aspect of the journey and every part of the business from all sides and in a holistic way, and not just one way, because we comply with GDPR, amazing, but now we have got the data. Okay, well, is it actually protected and stored in the right way at every point of its journey? And again, when we think about this isn't just for the now, because some of I think the Capital One data and the Sony data, but especially the Sony data, I think it went back to 2005 of ex-employees. So it's not just people who are in the business right now. But of course, criminals, once they access data, they access any data that you have. So if the organization has data from the past 10 years, or 15 years, or even longer, then all the data is stolen. And that is a massive risk in itself. So it's also thinking about how long do we store data? And do we still need it after however many years? Because if we don't, then why are we storing it? It's just exposing us to even more risk. And then offboarding, also very important, yet again, point that is very often kind of lackadaisy in a lot of ways, let's say, because very often the employee is leaving. So the emphasis is on recruiting someone new coming into the business. So perhaps more emphasis on the onboarding, then the offboarding, and like the laptop will be handed to IT, and then we're done. But we don't actually pay enough attention pay enough attention to the data that the employee had access to. Do they still have access to in any way, shape, or form? Are all the accesses being actually deactivated? Has the person handed everything in? I mean, very often this is not even checked. And this is a massive risk, because people have access to so much information. And when we talk about risk, this isn't just about, so I've focused a lot on obviously stealing personal data, which is huge. But the other things that are stolen very often are at risk. Things like intellectual property, financial information from the business. And this is also very important. So it's important for us to make sure that the offboarding process when it comes to data is just as robust as the onboarding, and all the information that we have from the business comes back to the business from the employee, but also the data of the now potentially ex-employee is being stored safely, because as I mentioned, things the data that's years old sometimes is being stolen. So of course I can't talk about cybersecurity and not talk about the impact of remote work. So as I mentioned, the Sony case goes back to 2014, so it's 10 years old. That was way prior remote work on a large scale. Now pretty much every business to a large or small degree works remotely or has remote access in some way. So that obviously increases our risk massively, because everyone has few devices, people work in different places, they work in different countries, there's different levels of security, and also different levels of people taking things seriously, right? You can have security, but if they don't take it seriously, then unfortunately they're posing a lot more risk for us. So 74% of organizations report business impacting cyber attacks are tied to remote work technology and how vulnerable we are because of this. 80% of security and business leaders indicate increased exposure to risk due to remote work, obviously, and 67% of recent cyber attacks targeted remote employees exploiting weak security in personal devices and home networks. So if you think about the fact that 67% of criminals have actually targeted remote employees and how many people now work remotely, this is a massive point of risk. And this is where there is the personal devices, laptops are being used, obviously emails, there is weak security in personal devices, home networks, sometimes also country networks, because we don't always have people just in the UK. So all of this is also worth considering. And again, I don't want to sound like this is HR's job, because yes, we have obviously oversight and overview of the data and what people are handling and so on, but equally we also need to work in partnership with IT, with our cybersecurity teams, and with leadership to make sure that all the processes are actually the right processes and as robust as possible. So this isn't just our responsibility. And one of the biggest threats, which actually presents 50% of breaches reported in a recent study, is insider threats. So it's via our own employees and people connected to the company, so contractors or agencies. And this is one of the largest issues in cybersecurity right now. And again, you have a link to this report from McKinsey from 2019. So again, it's a little bit older. But the report, I think, starts on page 34 about the whole report is amazing, but the insider threat section is from page 34 or 5, I think. And it's super, super helpful. So if you want to have a look at it and check it out, I definitely recommend it, because it also walks you through how to do a risk assessment internally in terms of our employees and where do we think the risks are. So there isn't enough time for me to go into detail on this. That's why I focus on the process, kind of from recruitment, from entry to exit and the whole journey. But within this report, there's also a process for you to have a look at. And Arish is asking, can we have the access to the recording? Yes, you have access to I think you have access to the recording, and it'll also be available on YouTube, I believe. But Marshane, please let me know if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people will get the recording.
Yes, sorry. I was just replying. So we upload it onto our blog within like a week or so, and the slides are sent out. Oh, I think the recording is also sent out in an email in the next couple of days or so. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so I definitely recommend looking at this report, because it will also walk you through how to identify risks of employees and why people might want to become an insider when it comes to getting data out of the organization. And sometimes it is very obvious if you have this granted employee who has a lot of access to data and so on, like that may be an obvious risk. But there are also other risks explained in there. So I definitely recommend having a look at it, because again, this is something that our perception is it's not going to happen to us, and B, if we think that it is going to happen, naturally we think it's going to come from the outside. Yet inside the job is often the case also. So it's important for us to pay attention to this. So of course, what can we do? And again, as part of your gifts for attending today's session, you'll have 2 handouts, and one of them will give you a checklist for basically creating as robust processes within HR as possible. But I also wanted to mention a few key things. So first of all, is we can't do anything unless we know what we're dealing with, right? So I always think awareness gives you the biggest power in business and in life, because if you're aware of something, you can decide what to do with it. If you're unaware of it, then you're not going to do anything about it because you don't know it exists and you don't pay attention to it. So first of all is actually identifying the landscape of what is happening within the organization, and where are the risks, and where maybe are we doing well, and so on, where are the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities for every point. So we need to identify what's happening. Then we need to also obviously do analysis, evaluation, and mitigating circumstances, and having a really robust what if. Because again, sometimes we do the risk assessments and they're treated as it's not going to happen to us. So it's kind of a piece of paper that hopefully it's probably also digital paper, but so it's not, we don't have to pay attention too much, but the risk is huge, not just to reputation, but genuine risks of, obviously, if data is being stolen of people, then as we already know, the cost can be huge in terms of finances, in terms of productivity, and brand reputation. So it's a massive risk. So it's important for us to think, okay, let's first of all assess the landscape of what is our cybersecurity within the business. And again, I definitely recommend working with the cybersecurity teams if you have them, or your IT teams, or obviously finding an organization that can help. There's lots of amazing organizations. Again, probably also check what security things they have got in place to make sure that they practice what they preach first and foremost for their own organization. But this is very important. And then monitoring. And again, we know the importance of monitoring in HR. But over here, because things evolve so quickly, and obviously criminals are getting savvier and savvier. The technology is developing at a crazy speed right now. And criminals are developing their techniques at a massive speed as well. We need to be aware of what is happening and try to be one step ahead rather than be one step behind, because if we're behind, then it's obviously too late and it's very difficult to recover. So your incident response planning is key. So we need to be able to prepare for this. Then we need to think, okay, well, how do we actually find out that something happened? Because you don't want to find out from a third party, or if it's ransomware, then of course you arrive and you see in your laptop that happened, but sometimes it's not very obvious immediately that data has been stolen. But it's important for us to find out and then think, okay, well, how do we deal with this, and how do we make sure that we recover from it and use the lessons for future? Because the thing also especially with brand reputation, is that, as we already know from the statistics, no organization is immune, and things will happen. And no matter how well we prepare, there will still be risks that maybe we haven't considered. But if we have robust processes in place, and if we have justifications for how we store things or why we store them and so on, why we store them in that way and so on, then in general, the public is much more willing to be more forgiving, because they can see that work has been done. And no one, sometimes it's just impossible to predict things, of course, especially things like this, where people specialize in being criminals, and that's not our specialty. So it can be difficult to be 100% protected. But if we're well prepared and we can prove it, then people are more understanding. Whereas if something happens and it's obvious that the processes weren't there, and we didn't have robust methodology inside to be able to protect the data and so on, then of course people are quite unforgiving, because we're dealing with personal data. And also the same if, for example, if intellectual property is impacted as well. So well-defined incident response is absolutely crucial to be able to recover quickly and continue resilience, and then use it obviously for learnings, because again, just because it happened once doesn't mean it's never going to happen again. In fact, there is still a risk that if it happened once, it's going to happen again, because now the criminals have got you on their radar. The other very important thing is obviously education of our employees. So still, we know the importance of learning and development, and we know the importance of education, but this is still one of the most effective defenses against cyber threats. So we need to have, we need to be able to tell our employees from potential cyber risks to a cybersecurity and to protect us of their own and also companies' data. So unless people are obviously aware of the risks and unless they are aware of what they can and cannot do, unless we have robust policies and we educate people on them, we are also creating risks because we feel like the responsibility is on us. Yet, as we know, insider threat is the biggest threat, and then normally HR teams or even leadership teams are quite small in relation to everybody else, and everybody else is carrying the risk also. So the more we educate, the obviously more effective we can be. And this is really important when it comes to not just writing policies, but also educating people on those policies. So just sending a policy and asking people to sign that they have read it is meaningless because a lot of the times they haven't read it. But actually doing training sessions on the policies and why are they in place and why are they important and why we're asking people to be part of this and be the protectors rather than the people who pose risks through very often unintentional actions and behaviors. So education is power, as we know. And I'm going to leave a few minutes for the Q&A, but of course, as I mentioned, you'll be able to download and we'll also send out your HR cybersecurity robustness checklist. So you basically have all the processes for you to think, okay, how can we do a risk assessment without missing any part? So I mentioned some of them, but again, there isn't enough time to cover everything in detail. We could talk about it for days. I'm sure you don't want to sit here listening to me for days. So the checklist will hopefully be helpful. And also the cybersecurity risk points in HR processes. So both of them are a gift for you for attending today. And on that note, I would like to just pause for the last few minutes and see if you've got any questions, any thoughts, anything that hasn't been clear or has been massively worrying. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you so much for joining. Any questions from anyone?
No questions? Okay, no worries. So we'll send out a recording of this webinar to you all in the next few days, as well as the slide deck from this presentation. I'm going to post in some of our details about our inquiries team and how you can contact us if you're interested in doing any of our courses. So lots of you may have already expressed interest in studying a CIPD course, which is why I've provided that information in the chat. But I think that might be everything. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope that you will find it really interesting. And so hopefully we'll hear from some of